I'm Dr. Kelly Starrett with H-Wave OTC. I just want to take a second and address the fact that many millions of Americans are at home sheltering in place right now and who also are suffering from persistent pain, long-term chronic pain, and maybe even just pain because we're waiting to have an orthopedic surgery, like myself. And one of the things that we have seen is that suddenly those therapies that we were counting on, like injections or physical therapy or regular visits to my physiatrist or physician, suddenly have been canceled. And that leaves us with a hole in our lives about how to manage our persistent pain and chronic pain and some of those implications of that disability on ourselves. So how do we make sense of this? One of the things that I want to highlight for you right now, of course, is that this is a complex physical biological system. I am a complex human being. And of course, even how I feel, the stress I feel in my life about my work or uncertainty, all of that can, play very much into making me feel worse about my knee or my back or my neck or whatever is plaguing you. And in this time, what we would suggest is that you take a moment and do what we recommend for all of our athletic populations, which is control what we can control. So some of the aspects of chronic pain, persistent pain that often are overlooked because they're soft and sort of easy to give lip service to are movement and sleep. And one of the things that we're noticing right now in this extraordinary time is that a lot of the movement practice or non-exercise activity that many of us were engaged in just in our daily lives has been pared away. One of the things that we're trying to do is to actually see if we can get more movement or more loading into our daily ritual. Now, that doesn't mean exercise, that just means moving more. And one of the things as a long-term chronic low back sufferer, or I was even hospitalized as a child for my low back pain, I appreciate that when you have persistent pain or chronic pain, it's debilitating and you don't want to move. And what we are trying to impress upon you is that if we can encourage you to get as much non-exercise activity as you can in the day, we'll see the whole system respond in kind. One of the problems with chronic pain and persistent pain, or even acute orthopedic pain, is that our desire to move is really greatly reduced. And in that moment, one of the problems is that the body doesn't get the feedback and input that it requires to fall asleep, to feel moving, to feel better, to decongest tissues just by circulating fluids around our body. And one of the ways that we can do that is just by changing our mindset around, hey, this is not about exercises or rehabilitation programming. This is about how do I move more? And for some of us, that may just mean, hey, all I need to do is sit to the edge of the couch or the chair more and just make my trunk work a little bit more during the course of the day. It may mean, hey, can I stand and hold on to the back of a chair during my favorite television program? Can I take some calls and be leaning up against something or being supported by something? Or it just may mean, hey, can I get more steps in my apartment? Can I get more steps even out on my balcony? Recently, we saw a man in England run an entire marathon in the course of about 16 feet. He just went back and forth. So we know that it's possible, but we want to appreciate that it is difficult. So your number one goal in these times is to improve and get as much input in safely for your body that you can take. And we get that desire to train, desire to move is highly diminished in these times. But we just want to appreciate that as a complex human being, when we see us circulate, when we end up getting some input in, that can even temporarily mask how our brain is perceiving whatever threatened tissue response is being sent up to the signal. So you know that sometimes one of the worst times during the day when we feel our aches and pains or chronic persistent pain is when we lay down at the night and stop moving, right? It's that lack of movement suddenly. The only thing my brain can hear is the sensitized or triggered or alarmed tissue system. So let's start by saying, hey, look, if you have a smartphone, you actually have an activity tracker, and most of us have our smartphones with us a lot, but I could actually hold that smartphone or put it in my pocket and just begin to say, hey, I know that I need to move more. Let me see if I can just get 1 minute of walking around my kitchen, and I'll take a rest, and then get another minute and take a rest, and get as many 1 minutes as we can. Ultimately building to try to regain as much tolerance and as much movement as we can during the day. Which leads us to our next piece. And our next piece is really appreciating the impact of sleep on a stressed animal. So when we find ourselves in persistent pain and chronic pain situations, we all know that the first thing that goes out the door is your sleep, which basically heightens your sensitivity and threat to anything going on in your body. It makes us 30% or more immune compromised. We understand that tissues don't heal as fast when we're sleep deprived. And what we want to do is help you to establish this idea that it's not just, hey, sleep more, that's the end of the question. It's about getting as dense quality sleep as we can and controlling what you can control. And if you wake up in the middle of the night and you need to move around or read to do something, that's okay. What we're going to do is say, hey, look, our goal is ultimately to try to get to 8 hours of good sleep a night. If you have the means, I highly recommend grabbing some kind of sleep detection mechanism, a cheap wristband, if you can do that, just to help us try to bring consciousness to this. Because what we find is that when people are highly stressed and are underneath that magic 7 hours of sleep, that is an animal or a human being that isn't going to be able to be focused very well, certainly isn't going to be able to manage the additional stresses of all this pain on our bodies. So in so much that we think that sleep is one of the really hidden reservoirs of capacity to improve persistent pain and chronic pain, there are some things we can do to improve our sleep. One is set an alarm to go off an hour before you decide you need to go to bed. And partly is we want to have a defined bedtime. When we know sleep is disrupted, having a defined bedtime can help my circadian rhythms appreciate that, hey, we go to bed at 10 o'clock. That means at 9 o'clock, I start to shut myself down. Maybe I take a hot bath, maybe make myself feel better. And I'm already beginning a routine that's signaling my brain that it's time to get into bed. And what we're ultimately trying to do there is appreciate that if we can set that alarm, then we start to engage in a whole bunch of behaviors that triggers our brains to be rested now or feel like we need to sleep. Important to see the relationship between that non-exercise activity and sleep. And one of the things we know is that when we are suffering from chronic pain and persistent pain, we often don't get enough activity to actually drive what we call sleep stress or sleep pressure, which is the thing that makes us feel sleepy. So the more activity we can get in the day, the more likely we are to fall asleep and then have some deep sleep. We also recommend that you try to curtail caffeine between 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock, somewhere in between during the afternoon. That for you is a caffeine cutoff, because a lot of us have different caffeine metabolization sort of capacities. And one of the things we know is that a coffee late in the afternoon or caffeine late in the evening can certainly disrupt the quality of my sleep. Now, in this time, we'd also recommend that you make your room as cold as possible and as dark as possible. And even purchasing a cheap eye mask on Amazon, or even tying one of your COVID scarves around your head can make a big difference in keeping the room dark, especially since many of us can't control the light sources in our room. So what ends up happening then is if we can make this commitment that we're going to at least be in bed for 8 hours, the research has shown in our top athletes, for example, that if we had people get in bed a half hour earlier at night, just a half hour, in 2 weeks they were able to sleep a whole nother night. Now, you're not alone. We see that the sleep is the sort of the greatest limiting factor to a lot of our athletic populations. But what we, again, fail to appreciate is how a sleep-deprived human is more sensitive to chronic pain and persistent pain. So in this situation, when we're locked down at home and can't engage in some of these basic behaviors of self-soothing or seeing my practitioner, it's important to think two things. One, can I move more during the day? And again, that can be scaled appropriately for you, as much movement as you can get, as much activity as you can get safely, which doesn't flare you. And second, this is a real opportunity to try to hit that magic 8 hours of sleep a night. What we want you to appreciate again is that 7 hours means that you're just barely holding on, and 8 hours is that magic goal where we start to see tissues be able to heal and things start to become sort of less stressed. And always, we want to appreciate that having a resource like an H-Wave OTC can be very, very important for what? Decongesting, which helps us to get movement without motion, right? We're getting those tissues to load, we're circulating blood, we're circulating lymph, we're getting the tissues to have some non-threatening input, even though our brains might think, hey, this knee is a problem, suddenly when there's movement, our brains think, hey, look, the quads are moving, the hamstrings are moving, maybe this isn't such a big problem. So it's a sneaky way of getting movement into a tissue system that doesn't want to move. So imagine if that's my back, but all of my back musculature is moving, my brain is going to appreciate and actually think that that is non-threatening movement, which is part of the game. Of course, we always have high frequency on-demand pain relief, which is crucial to be able to give myself a psychological break from pain. So by being able to manage my pain or attenuate my pain with some high frequency NMES through the H-Wave OTC can be a really crucial aspect to having a moment of respite so that I can get up and maybe move around a little bit more, then jump on my back, do what I need to do to manage my chronic pain and persistent pain. Always, the great people at H-Wave are here through concierge and virtual programming. They can help you, they will call you, they will FaceTime you in order to help you support, get the pads, get the information you need. We appreciate more than ever that you are in a really, really tough situation, and that if you're waiting for surgery or you're already dealing with chronic pain, persistent pain, that there are resources available to you. Tune in here for more of those resources.